What's up? If you're using Steam and you're messing with some of the old DOSBox games, like especially for me, it was the Commander Keen series, you're probably going to run into problems if you're using like a general gamepad or something with it versus the person who put this together just obviously didn't hardly have a clue what they were doing about dealing with DOSBox and all that kind of stuff, which is somewhat understandable. But when I pay for something, I don't care if I pay 1 penny for it. I just all of a sudden have this expectation that things should be done right, or at least, patched within a reasonable amount of time. But that's not the case. So I thought I'd just go ahead and, for the past like solid day, like most of yesterday and then the first few hours of today, I've been going back and like dinking with all of these settings and just trying like every possible combination, reading all sorts of stuff on the internet about how to like make this playable, because I'm like, I got this and paid a few bucks or whatever I paid for it, and then I was just so disappointed. I was like, I'd rather just go download my own copies off the internet and play those aside from this, like what did I pay for? It's a joke. But anyway, there are ways to get in there. I was like, if I could just find those files. So it's really pretty easy. So if you come over here to the library list and right click, and you can go to manage and do browse local files right there, or I believe you can even hit this gear icon and then you can go to manage right there on the game you want, and then you just go to browse local files, right? And when you do that, it will open up an Explorer window, and you can see it's in the 32-bit program files, Steam, Steam apps, Common, Commander Keen, and then here's all the stuff. Um, you can just tell there's just so much redundant stuff right here. Like none of this junk is necessary down here, to my knowledge. Like none of that even gets used. Uh, I guess these are some kind of images, which I don't even know if those ever get used. Like, what's this? Yeah, I don't think I've ever been shown a screenshot of what game I'm about to pick. Anyway, what it apparently does is it comes through and when you hit play, like if I come back over here and I hit play, it's going to pop up this menu of 5 choices, and it's Keen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in respective order right there. So if I go back over here, then I can see if I right click on this one and go to edit, it will effectively open it in Notepad. And you can see what it does is it goes into the base one folder, which is kind of like synonymous with Keen 1. Um, and it calls DOSBox, which is a little program that emulates a DOS environment so that these old DOS games can run. And then inside of that DOSBox, it basically what it does behind the scenes is it loads this as the C drive, this base one folder. Um, so it calls Keen 1, and then it applies this Keen 1 conf to it. It runs it full screen, and then it exits after it's done. And that's basically what all these do with their respective base 2 lines with Keen 2. I'll just open that real quick. Oh, got to select it first. And go to edit. And you can see it's the same thing with a 2 instead of a 1. So that's cool. That's all identical. And keeping with like minimal editing on this kind of stuff, so that less is more. So what we'll do is we'll deal with this Keen 1. These batch files are fine. We'll just leave them. So you go in here. I've already edited mine. I've already updated DOSBox and everything in here. Instead of 7.2 or 7.1 or whatever they're using, I'm using 7.4-3, which if you go to the DOSBox website, I'll just go DOSBox, and then you can see it's DOSBox.com. You just go there, and right here, DOSBox has been released. You can just go to downloads, and then this one for me on Windows, it just will automatically download the installer. Here's if it's not auto detecting which one for you. So you'll go there, you'll click on your thing. This is obviously Windows specific, and you'll download DOSBox, which I've already done, but I guess I'll do it again. You gotta wait the 5 seconds or whatever, and you can see I've already downloaded it right here. So you normally hit save and then run it after it's done. I'm just going to tell it to open and like skip all those steps, right? Ooh, actually, what you want to do is not tell it to open. Okay, so pretend like we downloaded it and everything, and I just reopen an Explorer window, and we're just looking at this file in there and not in a save as dialog or whatever. So what I'm going to do is right click, and the program you need is 7-zip, or some type of thing that can open an exe file as an archive. 7-zip will for sure do it. You can get that from like 7zip.org or whatever. Then you open as an archive, and then you can see there's the files. So then what I'll do is I'll just hit Control A to select them all, and then go up here to extract, and then I extracted them to, you can just extract this same exact file, just extract it to that folder, then extract it to that folder, go through the same process. Don't forget to select all, or once you go back, it will be like that, just select it on documentation, and if you hit extract, it will only extract the documentation. So anyway, just make sure, select all, and extract it to each one of those base folders. It will ask you, when I go there, extract, I'll go to like base 4, and it's going to say, hey, you know, there's, mine obviously says 74-3 for both of them, but yours will say like something else, and you'll say yes to all, and that will override everything in that folder, which is what you want to do. Any of these files, like the SDL files especially, and the exe files, you want to do all that. You want to overwrite those. This isn't necessarily a required step to do, but I did it along the way. It gives you the latest, pretty much the latest DOSBox. You can go and get SVN builds that are a little more specific or whatever, but this is like, seems to be good enough. And that's the first step. So then I'm going to go back over here. I'm in the Steam Apps Common Commander Keen Base 1. And if you look up here, I deleted the other folders. If you want to, that's fine. Like, you can get rid of the capture folder and that video buffer thing, because if you look in here, there's those same ZMBV files. So you might as well just get rid of that old directory. Just, there's no reason to leave it hanging around. You can also get rid of that TGZ file that you'd see right here. Just taking up space. It's all a big joke. It's not, none of that junk is even used. Let me look through here real quick. That uninstall could probably go. I just left it. But you can see, like, you probably want to do maybe a reset key mapper and reset options wouldn't be a bad idea. And get rid of that DOSBox.conf file. We're not using that. This Keen1 file, I made a backup of the old one just to be safe. I'm over that, so I can get rid of that. This Keen1 conf is what matters. And so what you want to do is your DOSBox, if you go right here to options, this batch file, I'm going to show you what's in it. It just runs DOSBox with edit conf, opens up an editor, So what it's doing is it's going to edit, it's going to generate and edit a default configuration file, right? Because as of now, yours should still be this old Keen1 based on an old DOSBox with like half the settings in it are totally bunk. So just double click on that, right? And then what that's going to do is it's going to open up, it's going to generate this DOSBox-version.conf file, and then you got to go to save as. Save as, navigate back to this folder right there, and then you're going to save it as on top of that file right there. Overwrite that with this default configuration. So I'll go ahead and close this out and pretend I just did that, because I did. And comp file might not automatically open for you in a text editor, so you can just right click, open with, and then like Notepad, or you can choose a default program, like, you know, choose default program, and select some type of a plain text editor, you know, not Word or some fancy text editor, something like WordPad, Notepad, source code editor, something like that. And then once you do, you can just literally just edit the file, right? Maybe if yours has that option to just edit, that should just send it straight to Notepad anyway. And so I've changed a lot of defaults in here, I think. I was just thinking around so much. So full screen true, full double false. Full double, is probably set to true, but to me that just slows everything down, doesn't offer much improvement. And then this full resolution is the pixel resolution at a full screen that it's going to do. The trade-off here is if you go to, even though we're playing old DOSBox games that are like maybe 320 by 200 or, you know, what is it? There's another similar, what is it? 320 by 240, something in that range is what it is. So you can set that full screen resolution really low, but if you go too low, then it's going to do like a little tiny window in your screen. It will just, like it will just use this top corner or something of your screen to do it. So on mine, I have to do at least 640 by 480, but some of these it will be set like the original Commander Keen one set to 800 by 600, and that's just horrible for my screen for some reason. That's just like one of the worst values I think it could get and try and translate from. So just like DOSBox itself recommends, is keeping in step with that, like 320 by 240, 640 by 480, 960 by 720. Um, if you do the 640 by 480 and it goes pretty much full screen for you, then you can do that and get away with the 2x uh, scaling. See, I've changed this from the default to normal 3x because when I'm to fill up this screen with the smaller pixel, the 320 by 200 or whatever pixels, it's got to multiply it times 3 to get an almost full screen. And honestly, the performance on my system, which is just a mediocre, quad core system with like an AMD ATI A6 chipset, basic built-in Radeon, kind of like probably single core GPU or whatever, like nothing fancy. Um, I was able to get acceptable performance. So that's the other thing is if you just want everything to work really simply, you can try putting this output surface to OpenGL or OpenGL NB for non-bilinear filtering. And the non-bilinear filtering, the NB one, that's going to be more of like a pixel perfect representation. So you're going to get those sharp jagged edges on the pixels as was originally intended by the game. If you do the regular OpenGL, it's going to be noticeably blurry. And those are the two main differences I noticed with that. Auto lock trues just for the mouse. Sensitivity 100 is default. On one of my old configs, I noticed I'd bump that up to 500. All this other stuff should be default. I changed the mapper name to mapper.keen, whatever. And then you come down here. This SVGA underscore S3 is virtually the same thing in the older DOSBox that comes with Commander Keen as just saying VGA. That's roughly that's like a modified version of that plain VGA. I switched mine. One of the things I was using on SVM build of DOSBox that I was using without Steam for all sorts of stuff, I had found that this Visa old VBE in general seemed to work for me. I can't really even hardly tell the difference, if at all, between those two. So if you're unsure, just stick with the SVGA S3 mode. I'm not sure how much detail I just got into on this OpenGL, this output surface versus OpenGL, but if you pick the OpenGL, then your Steam overlay will work. So that's the main thing to note there. Like if you pick Surface, which will try and go to Direct Draw if it's available, which probably is on most systems and Windows systems, and it will, what else? It won't allow that overlay because of the way that it works. It's not compatible with it. So there's a trade-off there, depending on whether or not you're using Steam itself to like translate your joystick button pushes to like keyboard map. You can also use DOSBox itself to map the keyboard, or you can just try and get your joystick to go straight through like a DOS joystick would have back in the day and map it in the game like we normally used to do things. That's what I'm actually striving for right here, is to just like bypass any of those Steam specific mappings or DOSBox specific mappings. I personally prefer to bypass all that junk. And plus, the Steam one requires the OpenGL, which is blurry, and it has like some screen shearing. I wouldn't quite describe it as screen tearing, but it shears the screen where you can notice that occasional ripple go through the screen. Not a big deal. Doesn't really hurt the playability, but striving for perfection, I thought, if I could play the game without that and still use my gamepads, that would be a lot nicer. So anyway, most other stuff's default. I have aspect set to true. To my knowledge, I don't notice any slowdown with that. If anything, I just noticed that in stuff where it's squished, that will unsquish it. But on my personal mediocre setup, I don't notice anything about that. This scaler I switched to, you can experiment with all of these as well too. And I recommend running the game in between each iteration. Don't change a bunch of settings and and test it, or you'll never spend way too much time trying to figure out which one did what. Um, Again, the 3x, you can leave it on normal 2x if you're just doing like a 640 by 480, but if you bump this up to something, like that or higher, and your actual DOSBox itself will appear small, which in this situation is fine because we shouldn't be typing in DOS anyway. But the game, once the game kicks in, that's what matters. And to get it almost full screen with slight black bars around the edge, no big deal. That's fine. I have to use the 3 multiplier, and again, I see like no real noticeable difference, I don't think, between the 2x at 640 by 480 or the 3x at the 960 by 720 or whatever. All this should be able to stay the same on the newest. Don't try and apply these settings to your default one. If you're using the older DOSBox, you're going to have to do some homework as far as like what's what, because it's a lot of the same settings. There's about maybe half as many settings per feature or whatever, and they're slightly named. Like this might not be pre-buffer. Don't know for sure, but just for example, that might just say buffer. So some of the names have been adjusted. Also on theirs, they have everything set to like 2250 for the rates. I'd suggest bumping those up to 44-100 because a lot of times back in the day that used to reduce CPU power to run it at the lower rate, but now I think it just translates to more translation because a 48K or 44.1K is a lot closer to the actual sampling that the stock sound chip is going to use. And then when you get down here, most of these are the sound settings are left at default. Got the rate at 44-100. Gus, false. That's just, and then the rate at 44-100, even though that shouldn't really matter. Gus's Gravis Ultrasound, it's an alternative to Sound Blaster. 99% of the stuff can just use Sound Blaster, and you shouldn't need to use like Gus or anything like that. I left all these the same, and then I set Disney to false. Tandy being at auto is effectively false unless you specifically say that you want to emulate a Tandy machine, so I left that. The joystick at auto, these are all defaults for DOSBox 7.4-3, but they shouldn't line up with what you're seeing if you're looking at your old Keen configuration file. So in this time true is something to remember. I didn't have to ever switch it, but if you have issues, you might want to switch that one and see what your results are. All the rest of this is just stock. So basically there's your joysticks, what you want. PC speaker, no Gus. Sound Blaster 16 with 44-100. All these are 44-100. This block size, I do that down to, I think that at 4096, which to me just, if you get too much buffering on sound, that usually isn't a good thing. And that pre-buffer, I had my old one, I put that on 20. I want to say they had it on 40 or something. So put that on like 20 or 25, block size on 1024, rate 44-100, no sound false, of course. All those can be auto. Maybe for the core on the older one, you might want to specifically wire that to dynamic, but auto should pick dynamic if possible on the newer releases. Aspect true, frame skip 0, scalar normal 3x, either one of those. What else? Just double check all your settings. This window resolution, so that's when it's non-full screen, then it's just going to use the original 320 by 240 or whatever full screen. It's going to jump up, and then this full screen true should make it default to full screen true, so you're not in a window mode, and of course full double most likely off. Okay, so all that being said, then what you can do to test it, so you're going to save that, you're running this, double clicking that, and then saving as over the top of this file, which you'll probably have to re-navigate out of like your app data folder to, and then delete that old DOSBox.conf and any of those files I mentioned earlier that, you know, you only need these files that you're seeing here. And even that, you only really need the all caps files, because those are the DOS files. And that keen1.conf and the DOS, and you know, this DOSBox thing right there at least. And then what you can do is you can go back up to that Commander Keen Common folder, and I'll just double click this. And this is a newer version. That's where it's not scaled, because I have it on whatever I have it on. It's not a big deal though, because we're not using DOS, but as you can see, that's scaled. And if you look, there's like, you can still see pixels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit F4, and that's going to allow me to calibrate my joystick, which is, I have a PS2 style controller. It's actually a PS3 generic wired controller, which is basically the PS2 controller with like a home button on it. I'm going to hold that left stick to the upper left corner and hit the square key, and the bottom right corner and hit the square key again. And then I'll hit square to start a new game. And then, so if I don't know what my video recorder is doing, so I don't know how good the frame rate's coming through, but there's virtually like no tearing, no anything. This game's so old though that it's like the scrolling and all that's not going to be absolutely perfect, so I think that's a bunk cause. And I don't know if you can see the black bars around the edge of my screen, or if it's just giving you the video straight pixel for pixel or what, but there's a tiny bit of black bars around the screen, not much. Like, I almost wouldn't even notice it if I wasn't looking for it. And there shouldn't be any tearing on this stuff. I mean, the scrolling's not the smoothest in the world. This is a game from like circa 1990. But if like this stack of these little cans or whatever right here, like that is one of the easiest things to tell if that tearing's happening or not. And if you notice, it goes back to like the days of the N64 versus the PlayStation 1. The warbly stuff on the PlayStation 1 would actually, like, that has that sharpness and that almost like flicker effect like the N64. So there's that trade-off. Like, otherwise you can get the tear and less flicker effect. But anyway, this is not tearing on me at all. What it's doing is it's in surface mode or whatever I had it on, and it's detecting the direct draw stuff, and it's basically using that. It's using a very low level system specific stuff, which has a tendency, OpenGL works on a more general level, but it's more general, you know, like, because Windows is the gaming platform for PCs, obviously the vendors spend a lot more time perfecting like their DirectX drivers than they do like some OpenGL driver that a Linux person's going to use. They're like, I don't know. I think it's ridiculous, honestly, but that's the way it goes. So, but the problem here is that I have no Steam overlay. So if I hit like Shift Tab, nothing happens, right? So I'm going to quit to DOS. And that whole thing, that whole process, like, is identical for all of these base folders. So you just do, I'm just doing it in Keen 1 base 1, but you just do the exact same thing. Copy, like I said, copy those DOSBox files over the top of the other base folders, and then edit that default config. You can even just edit the default config in like this base 1 folder, that one that we saved over here. And then you can in turn save as to each one of those base folders. Save as base2 keen2.com, save as base3 keen3.conf, because they all should be identical. Like, when it's all said and done, they're going to use the same exact settings. And if you really wanted to get creative, you could just, you know, put that comp file like right here, just do one DOSBox.conf file in here and just edit all those, whatever. I was just trying to pick like the simplest solution. So anyway, that works when we go through and do it like that. But if I open it in Steam, sometimes it wouldn't detect the controller. So I had to go online and find this blog thing about it because, well, I don't know if I really want to mess it up to prove the point. But this is what you do if it's not working. You go Steam, Settings, and then you come down here and it'll probably be on like Account. Come down here, click on Controller, and then click this top General Controller Settings. And once you're in here, check Generic Gamepad Support, and then click. I have to click a little bit low on mine because they don't seem to understand that like some people have different resolutions and like they obviously don't want to do anything but track us and see how many hours we're playing. They don't completely care about the experience. And then you come here to Properties on the game specific one. Right click and go to Properties, or come down here and click something like that. Go to Properties. This will take you to the game specific properties. And then what you want to do is drop this thing down and pick Force on this top one. Steam input per game setting requires restart a game. Forced on. And then I'll close that. And then what we do is we hit play. Then you can go into any one of them. And it's loading that DOSBox configuration file we made. Joystick not detected, if you notice that, right above VGA card. So that's bad, right? Like, oh, we have all our settings. What it's doing is the Steam overlay stealing the joystick, to my knowledge, and it's not allowing, the game isn't in that OpenGL mode, so it's not compatible with it. So I'll show you. I'll hit F4 and I'm pushing joystick 1, nothing's happening. You know, it doesn't know the joystick's there. But with the keyboard, and arguably these older Commander Keens are almost as easier. This is how I learned to play video games with the keyboard back in the day. You know, the game still works fine. It's still all the same. You just lose that joystick, and of course the chatting or anything like that, broadcasting the screen, all that stuff's gonna. It's basically just like I was playing it direct through DOSBox, but Steam has stolen the controller. And of course, Steam doesn't want to tell the community how to fix stuff because they probably don't even know themselves. And somebody else in the community figures stuff out outside of the community anyway and posts their own blog post about it. And I was like so mad by the time I found that post. I didn't even think it was going to work. And I was like, yeah, right, let's watch another thing not even work. And it did work. So anyway, that was to show you that doesn't work. Go back to DOS or back to Steam, and what I'm going to do real quick just to demonstrate one thing is I'll go in here and change this to OpenGL. So edit this, and I'll change this to OpenGL. And I could do OpenGL NB, and that would be like pixel for pixel, like what we just saw with the controller with screen tearing. But I'm going to go ahead and do just regular OpenGL, which will be blurry pixels with screen tearing and controller support. So I'll save that, tab back over here, or actually I'm going to go to Steam itself, cancel that, and I'm just going to hit play on that first one that I edited. And it does matter which one you pick if you only edited one of those configuration files, right? But as far as this little like hack of, see, you can see the overlays working right there. Shift tab to begin. So I hit enter. Now I'm going to hit F4. No joystick. So that's expected. So this isn't working because I don't know. I had it configured in Steam. If you were to actually configure the controller and map the stuff, then this would. But you can maybe already see, I don't know if that video recorder, but there's a slight bit of screen shearing going on. Like it's almost unnoticeable, but it's there, and it will get a lot more noticeable in a minute. So if you look at like those cans and things like that, you should be able to see a ripple starting to go through stuff. Maybe you already have been, but like right here, you should definitely see some tearing and shearing going on with those stacks of those pink purple looking things. So anyway, that's the trade-off. Like you can, if you have crappy OpenGL drivers like I do, not the worst, but just mediocre, and you can deal with a little bit of screen shearing, and you want to use like a controller with the Steam overlay and broadcast and all that, that's the trade-off. I'm kind of scared to like really configure that controller. So anyway, let's say that whatever, you're over it. If you want to configure your Steam controller from here, that's what you'd do, right? You'd leave it on some OpenGL mode and do all that. I'm going to put mine back to Surface, save it. I'm going to close this, but check this out. It still should not detect my controller. Even though we're back to where we were, and my controller was just working. It says joystick detected. Huh. Anyway, it's a glitch. Like, I've done this, and then all of a sudden the joystick, like without changing any settings, just playing the game once through Steam and coming back. I've done this before and lost my controller permanently. Yeah, see, even though it was detected, it's still not letting me do that stuff. Let me see if we just... Yeah, it's not working at all, so that's what you run into. And then I think if I were to start it again, it's not even going to say detected this time. That's what it did the last round. Joystick detected, huh? Anyway. It's bizarre. It's inconsistent. Who knows, maybe whatever little thing I did, it probably won't still allow me to... Yeah, it's still not working even though DOSBox says it's detected. So we'll quit, and here's the trick. You just go Steam, Settings, Controller, General, and uncheck. The trick was you start the game with that generic gamepad support even though it doesn't work. So what I just did to kind of demonstrate that it wasn't working, that's necessary. So make sure generic gamepad controller support's clicked. You attempt to run the game, exit it, then come back and do this. Uncheck generic gamepad support. Click OK there, and then what was the last thing? So then we come here and we go to right click it, go to properties, and then change this forced on back to the global settings. And for some reason, going through that song and dance right there, to my knowledge, it's saying, hey Steam, ignore my generic gamepad or whatever. Don't try and capture it and do stuff with it. Just let me handle it. So then I'm going to hit play. Joystick detected right there, which is good, and it should be detected in the game as well. So I'll hit enter, then I'll hit F4 again, and hey, what do you know? Pretty weird, huh? And now my joystick's working, and I have only the slightest little black boxes around the thing, and virtually no screen tearing. But there's sort of like a stiffness that it seems like the screen has without that tearing, so I don't know. That's just, it's an old game. That's the way it is, right? But there's some videos on YouTube, like I can't remember who did it. I just watched it recently. It might be a really recent video. It's like April 2020. And there's somebody who compares like PlayStation polygons versus N64 polygons, or that warbly texture thing. And I couldn't believe I just watched that because I found that so relevant to like what I'm dealing with here. So this is sort of like the less warbly version, maybe, roughly speaking. But there's a rigidness there without those warbly textures, so that's a trade-off. Like on the N64, especially if you weren't using like the composite video, if you're just using like the coax connections, if there was like black and white stuff or whatever, it would do this artifacting. I forget what they call that exact kind of artifacting. So it's a trade-off. But anyway, that's that, and that's how you get a somewhat normal experience out of that. You just don't forget you can go to those settings, go to manage, browse local files, unpack that DOSBox, straighten up the configuration files, do that weird little quirky thing with the joystick, and then even on a mediocre system you should have the best of both worlds, and maybe even go into support and send a little message upstream to id Software, whatever. So maybe that will help you out.